Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking an absolutely incredible true story. It's one that's literally captivated the world for over a century. We are looking at exactly how the most luxurious ship ever built met its tragic end in the freezing waters of the North Atlantic.
Think about it. The ship that could never sink met its end in just 4 days. How on earth did this happen? This thing was considered a floating palace, a total marvel of modern design, and yet, its maiden voyage turned into one of the greatest disasters in human history, claiming more than 1,500 lives. Let's break down the mechanics, the decisions, and those fatal flaws that led to this sudden doom.
Okay, let's dive into this. Chapter 1. The Unsinkable Dream.
So right at the beginning of the 20th century, shipping companies were locked in this intense, cutthroat competition. But the British company, White Star Line, well, they took a totally different approach. Instead of just prioritizing pure speed, they set out to build the most luxurious passenger ship the world had ever seen. This wasn't just a boat, you guys. It was a magnificent floating palace. We're talking about electric elevators, a full-size swimming pool, a state-of-the-art gymnasium, these crazy luxury suites and fine dining restaurants. For the wealthy tycoons booking these tickets, this represented the absolute peak of human engineering and ultimate elegance.
And the sheer scale of this project? Absolutely staggering. 46,000 tons. To put that into perspective, construction began in 1909 in Belfast, and it took thousands of workers over 2 years just to complete the whole shebang. At nearly 882 feet long, the RMS Titanic was one of the largest moving objects ever created by humans. And because of its highly advanced watertight compartments, people firmly believed this massive structure was a mathematical certainty. They thought it was practically unsinkable.
Chapter 2. The Maiden Voyage.
But as we know, that perfection didn't last. Chapter 3, Warnings in the Dark.
As the Titanic moved deeper into the North Atlantic, the situation began to change drastically. Radio operators started receiving multiple, frantic messages from nearby ships warning them about large ice fields and icebergs directly in their path. Yet, unbelievably, the Titanic just kept pushing forward at nearly full speed. Now, historians believe the crew felt this false sense of confidence because the weather was calm and visibility appeared, well, really good. Now, what's really interesting here is the hidden danger of those seemingly perfect conditions. The ocean was unusually still, and because there were no waves crashing against the bases of the icebergs, there was zero white water to make them visible in the dark. It was, quite literally, a deadly trap. So as night fell on April 14th, temperatures plunged way below freezing, and a massive iceberg waited silently in the pitch black.
Which leads us directly into Chapter 4, The Fatal Collision.
The tension here is just incredible. You have this massive, unyielding force of nature hiding in the dark, just waiting directly in the path of this confident, speeding marvel of engineering. Then, at exactly 11:40 p.m., the lookout crew finally saw it. Iceberg right ahead! That warning bell rang out in the freezing night. The bridge immediately ordered a hard turn and for the engines to be reversed. But, it was a frantic, futile effort. A massive 46,000-ton ship simply cannot change direction fast enough.
So the starboard side scraped against the ice. Up top, many passengers barely even noticed. Some were actually joking about the impact. But below deck, it was an immediate, catastrophic engineering failure. The iceberg had torn open multiple sections of the hull. See, the Titanic was designed to stay afloat if up to 4 of its watertight compartments flooded. But in reality, 6 compartments were rapidly taking on water. The engineers below deck instantly recognized the terrifying mathematical certainty. This ship was going to sink.
Chapter 5. Panic and Evacuation.
The situation escalates so rapidly now. Shortly after midnight, Captain Edward Smith ordered the lifeboats to be prepared. Time was suddenly the most precious commodity on board. And this brilliantly illustrates the real core of the tragedy. The Titanic carried only 20 lifeboats. That was enough for barely 50% of the people on board. Because of outdated safety regulations, rules based on older ship sizes that just no longer made sense, half the passengers and crew were mathematically doomed right from the start.
The evacuation itself was just a tragic progression of chaos. At first, many passengers flat out refused to board the lifeboats. The massive ship still looked pretty safe, and a lot of people thought going back to bed was a better option. Because of this totally false sense of security, those early lifeboats actually left partially empty. Then, as crew members started strictly enforcing the women and children first rule, the grim reality set in. While musicians famously played on to try and keep people calm, the ship began to visibly tilt.
Families were painfully separated, and sheer panic spread like wildfire as people rushed toward the remaining boats while that freezing Atlantic water crept higher and higher.
Chapter 6. The Final Moments.
The physical destruction of the ship at this point was truly terrifying. Heavy furniture and objects were crashing violently through all those luxurious hallways we talked about earlier. Let's trace this final catastrophic timeline. 11:40 p.m., the fatal impact. 2 a.m., the bow plunges deep underwater at a horrifying angle. And then, at 2:20 a.m. on April 15th, the enormous structural strain causes the grand ship to literally break apart. The bow plunges beneath the ocean, the stern rises high into the air and then disappears completely beneath the waves. More than 1,500 people were left plunged into the freezing water. Tragically, most died from hypothermia within just minutes.
Let's move to Chapter 7. Rescue and Legacy. Hours later, in the freezing quiet, the rescue ship RMS Carpathia finally arrived on the scene. They were able to pull roughly 700 survivors from the scattered lifeboats. The world was utterly shocked. Subsequent investigations uncovered a series of fatal human errors that completely compounded the tragedy. They were carrying entirely too few lifeboats based on outdated laws, flagrantly ignoring repeated iceberg warnings from other ships, and maintaining an excessive speed through notoriously dangerous ice-filled waters simply because the weather seemed calm.
So the crucial point is how this affects us now. You see, the legacy of the Titanic disaster fundamentally changed maritime safety laws. It's the reason why today, if you go on a cruise, every single passenger ship must carry enough lifeboats for absolutely everyone on board. The safety that we take for granted today, it was paid for by the lives lost on that freezing night.
For decades, the ship lay lost in the dark. But in 1985, the wreck of the Titanic was finally discovered, resting nearly 12,500 feet below the ocean's surface. More than a century later, seeing those haunting images of the wreck serves as a really powerful, stark reminder. No matter how advanced human engineering becomes, it is never, ever stronger than nature itself.
Which brings us to our final thought for this explainer. Knowing what we know today about human hubris, would you have boarded the Titanic in 1912, swept up in the glamour and the promise of the unsinkable dream? Think about it. Let us know your thoughts in the comments and keep questioning the history that shapes our world.